Hello.
Okay. Shalom Aleichem. Okay. I'm just going to start because I love these things that I have on the screen here. Somebody, he puts the whole Gemara always in a very visual format, which you can really get the whole, even difficult amudim. He puts it down very, very nicely. It's somebody by the name of Haral Shapiro Amicha Gordon from Yeshiva Har Etzion. Very nice. Anyway, just to review the Mishnah, there's the Mishnah says that you read the 4 parashiyos. So the Shabbos before Rosh Chodesh, right before Rosh Chodesh Adar, or if Rosh Chodesh Adar falls on Shabbos, you read Parshas Shkolim. And then the Shabbos before Purim, you read Parshas Zachar. The third one you read Parshas Para, and the fourth one you read Parshas HaChodesh. And the fifth one, the Mishnah says, Choizrin Likrei Kogrogel. That's a very cryptic statement, which means that you go back to the normal reading. But what is the normal reading? So others want to say that during these 4 parshas, you don't even read the Parshas HaShavua. You only read Parshas Shkolim. You only read Parshas Zachar. You only read Parshas Para. And how are you going to call 7 people up? So how are you going to call 7 people up? So let's say in Parshas Zachar, you just keep repeating it over and over again. But we're going to learn that Chozer and Likrei Karagel, according to another opinion, means you start rereading the Haftorah. The Haftorah goes back to normal, talking about the Parsha. It's a normal Haftorah, not the four of them. And then the Mishnah said, hi, Sheldon, we're just reviewing the Mishnah briefly. Okay. We're just reviewing the Mishnah for a second. Talks about the 4 parshas. And then the Mishnah says that on certain days, let's say Rosh Chodesh, Chanukah, Purim, Tainis, Mamodis, Yom Kippur by Mincha, those days, let's say on Monday and Thursday, if Rosh Chodesh comes out on a Monday and Thursday, you don't read Parshas HaShavua, you read about Rosh Chodesh. If Chanukah comes out on Monday and Thursday, you read about Chanukah. If Purim comes out on Monday and Thursday, you read, instead about Parshas Havua, you read about Purim. That's what the Mishnah said. Now, we discussed that you have to read Parshas Shkolim. So now we're going to have this machlekes. What is Parshas Shkolim? So Rav is going to say it means Parshas Karben HaTamid, and Shmuel is going to say it means Parshas Kisisa. So let's read it inside. We are holding 3 lines from the top. Today's daf is daf Lamed and we're starting from 2 lines from the first wide line on the page, a little bit up there, but we'll catch up. So Mishnah says, "My Parshas Shkolim." What is Parshas Shkolim? What do we read for Parshas Shkolim? This is the question that the Gemara is dealing with. So the Gemara says, Rav says, Tzaves b'nei Yisrael v'martelem es kar b'ni lachmi. For Parshas Shkolim, you should read the Parshas, what we read, let's say, on the Parshas of the Karbid Tamid and Rosh Chodesh. That's Parshas Shkolim. Very strange. With Shmuel Amar, what we're familiar with, on Parshas Shkolim, you read about Parshas Kisisa. Kisisas Rosh, and everybody Zay Yitlu, Kolaiva, Machtas Shekel, that parsha. So the Gemara asks the question: Bishlam Lamanda Kisisa, according to the opinion that says Parshas Shkolim, you read the Parshas Kisisa, I need to correlate Parshas Shkolim. I understand why it's called Parshas Shkolim. The Ksibah Shkolim, because in Parshas Kisisa, it says about Shkolim, Zayitnu, Kolaiva ala Pagudim, Machtas Shekel. Elamad Yomer, it's Kabbadim Lachmi, that you read the Parsha of Rosh Chodesh. Does it say anything about Parshas Shkolim there? It doesn't say anything about Shkolim in there. So why are we reading that at Parshas Shkolim? And again, to remind you that the reason why we're reading Parshas Shkolim is to remind you that you got to give Shkolim for the Beis HaMikdash. So answers the Gemara in, yes, time am I. What's the reason? How do we know that you have to give each year? You have to buy the Karbonos Tzibor from new collection. Is K'der Rav Tavi, like we learned in the beginning of the page over here. Rav Tavi said that the Zois Oilas Chodesh B'chot Shoy, Rav Tavi said, Amar Rav Tavi on top of the page, Amar Torah Chadesh, when the new year comes, Have carbon mitruma chadasha, bring the carbon, pay for the carbon from the new collection. So that pasuk Zois Oilas Chodesh B'chot Shoy is written in the Rosh Chodesh parsha. Therefore, according to Rav, that's the appropriate reading of Parsha Shkolim. So the Gemara says, Bishlam Lamandiyam, it makes sense according to the opinion that says Tzaves b'nei Yisrael, Rishum Deksivi, carbon is cool, awesome. It says about carbon is Kidrab Tovi. That means it's talking about buying the new Karbonos Tzibor from the new collection. Elam, according to the opinion that you read Parshas Ksisa, yes, true, I grant you that it says in Parshas Ksisa, collect the shekel, karbonos mi ksiva. Was that the collection for karbonos? You know why they collected a half a shekel in Parshas Ksisa? Look closely. Shkalim ladonim ksiva. It's for the sockets of the Mishkan, the sockets of the Krushim, those silver sockets on the bottom of the Krushim. That's what it was collected for. So how do you see anything about the collection for karbonos tzibur? And says the Gemara, Ketutana Rav Yosef, Shalish Truma is Nain. There's 3 times it says the word Truma in that pasuk. We'll just quote you the Rashi. Machzas shekel Truma Lashem, Yitain Truma Sashem, Roseisa Truma Sashem. Read Parshas Kesis, the first few psukim, you'll see it says 3 times the word Truma. So therefore, one of them is Shel Mizbeach, the Mizbeach. You collect a half a shekel for the Mizbeach to bring new karbonos. V'shel Adonim l'Shadanim. A half a shekel went for making the sockets of the Mishkan. And then V'shel Bedek Abayis l'Bedek Abayis. Means for the Bedek Abayis, you collected anything you wanted to give from the 13 ingredients. Zahav, Kesef, Nechoshes, Cheles, Argoman, Slashani. So there are 3 times Trumas. So it's the pasuk hints that there was another collection for bringing new karbonos to the Mizbeach from a collection of half a shekel. So the Gemara says like this: Bishlama, it makes perfect sense. Lemandi Yoma Kisisa, that you read Parshas Kisisa like we do. Hainu Deshana Hay Rosh Chodesh Misharish Chodashim. When that now I understand when this Rosh Chodesh is different than any other Rosh Chodesh, because every other Rosh Chodesh that you read the parsha of the Rosh Chodesh, and in this one, in this parsha Shkolim, you're going to read Parshas Kisisa. Elam the Yom Karbani, my Shani. What is this different than any Rosh Chodesh? Every Rosh Chodesh we're reading Tzavas Bnei Yisrael. So how are people going to know that it's really Parsha Shkolim? That's the question. If you're reading the thing of Rosh Chodesh, you can ask anybody in shul. They're going to tell you, oh, it's a Rosh Chodesh today. They're not going to know that they're reading it because it's Shkolim. And for the Gemara Shani, it's different. If it was a regular Rosh Chodesh, right? You would read 6 on the parshas of the Shavua, and 1 you read Rosh Chodesh. Like any Rosh Chodesh that falls out on Shabbos, you read 6 on the parsha Shavua, and 1 is the Rosh Chodesh. But Idana nowadays, Kulim b'Rosh Chodesh. I mean, now when it's Parsha Shkolim, Kulim b'Rosh Chodesh. Fascinating. When it's Parsha Shkolim, what are they going to do? They're not going to even read Parshas HaShavua. They're going to only read Parshas Kisisa. How are they going to call 7 people up for Parshas Rosh Chodesh? This Dabel Bnei Yisrael. They keep reading it. So again, the Gemara's point is that it's very obvious that someone will be able to figure out it's Parshas Shkolim because they're not going to be reading Parshas HaShavua. They're just going to be reading the Rosh Chodesh reading, and therefore people are going to ask why they're reading Rosh Chodesh reading, and they'll tell you because it's Parshas Shkolim. So the Gemara says, I'm going to say the Parshas Chayzer. That makes sense. According to the opinion, the way you read the Mishnah is that you actually, on the 4 Parshas, you actually do not read Parshas HaShavua. Imagine that. You just read Parshas Zocha, you just read Parshas Parah, there's no Parshas Shavua, then you have a proof. Then you perfectly make sense. But according to the Mandiyam that explains the Mishnah, that you always read the Parshas Shavua. It's just the Haftarah changes. My Shani, what's going to be the difference? So again, back to the original question. If on Rosh Chodesh you read the Parsha of Rosh Chodesh, and on Shabbos Shkolim you're going to read Parsha of Rosh Chodesh. So how are people going to know you're reading it because it's Shkolim? Maybe they'll think it's Rosh Chodesh. And for the Gemara Shani, it's going to be very different. The Ilu Rosh Chodashim on a regular Rosh Chodesh, let's say a regular Rosh Chodesh, which is Shabbos, you call 6 up for the Parsha Shavua and 1 in the Parsha Rosh Chodesh. Again, the Gemara in its time did not have the mafter rereading an Aliyah. So for the 7 people, they call 6 for the Parsha Shavua and 1 for Rosh Chodesh. But the Ilu Hidana, but now that it's Parsha Shkolim, Kari, listen to this. Kari Tlosa Binyan Yom. They'll read 3 people to read the Parsha Shavua. So suppose the Parsha Shavua is Parshas Truma. They'll call 3 Aliyahs for the whole Parshas Truma. Ba'aba Kari the Rosh Chodesh, and 4 of them will call for Rosh Chodesh, and that people will say, "Oh, it's not Rosh Chodesh. Obviously, they're reading this parsha because it's Parsha Shkolim." So the Gemara asks a question. Meisvi, I'll ask you a question. Rosh Chodesh Adar shechol lias b'Shabbos. Let's say Rosh Chodesh Adar falls out on Shabbos. This brisa says, Korim Parshas Shkolim. You read Parshas Shkolim, umaftirim b'Yehoyada HaKohen, and you read the Mahafter of Yehoyada HaKohen, which talks about everybody contributing kesef, money. So that makes sense. Bishlam l'man yom kisisa. According to the opinion that on Parshas Shkolim, you read Parshas Kisisa, Hainu de Maftirim be Yehoyada HaKohen. That's why you make the Haftarah Yehoyada HaKohen, which also talks about people giving money. The Damila, but it's very similar. The Ksiv Kesef Nefashis Erka. In that Haftarah, it says the word Kesef, money. El L'man Yoma Es Karbani Lachmi. That Parshas Shkolim, you're just reading as Karbani Lachmi, Rashi Chadashim, that whole section that we read on a normal Rosh Chodesh, Midami. So how does the Haftarah relate to what you're reading for Parsha Shkolim? It doesn't say the word Kesef in the Parsha of Karbani Lachmi in Rosh Chodesh. And for the Gemara Dami, it is similar because if you, again, the whole source of that we have to make a collection is from that Parsha of Rosh Chodesh. So therefore, it would be similar to the Haftarah, which talks about the collection. Okay, basically you figured out right now is what the machlokes between Rav and Shmuel is. What do you read in Parsha Shkolim? Do you read a parsha in the Torah that talks about people donating half a shekel, or according to Rav, you read the source that you're supposed to make the collection? The source that you're supposed to make a collection is from Parshas Rosh Chodesh. Zois oilas chodesh b'chodshai. So the Gemara asks one more question. Meisvei cholias parshas smuchala. Let's say, like we can have it. Let's say Parshas Tetzava comes out on for Rosh Chodesh, right? For Parshas Shkolim. I'm sorry. Parshas Shkolim is Parshas Tetzava. Bein milfanah. Let's say it's the Shabbos before of Parshas Kisisa. Bein lachrei, or when it's the Shabbos after Kisisa, which means let's say Parshas Shkolim will come out on Parshas Vayakel. So the Kairin Oisa, you would read it the week before Kisisa, the Kaiflin Oisa, and then you would read it again. In other words, if it came out Parshas Jasava, you're going to read Parshas Shkolim Kisisa, and then next week for the Sedra, the Seder Sedra will be Parshas Kisisa. So you'll repeat it again. So Beishlam Elamandiyama Kisisa, this brisa makes perfect sense according to the opinion that what do you read for Parshas Shkolim is Parshas Kisisa. Hainim Misrami Bahu Zimna could come out at that time. Because normally, like we say, Rosh Chodesh Adar could come out like we're in right now. Could come out Parshas Tetzava or Parshas Vayakel. Elamandiyam Tetzava is Karbini that you're reading in Parshas Pinchas. Can it be that Parshas Shkolim could come out in Parshas Bamidbar? It never happens. Adar is usually in Seder Shemois, not in Seder Bamidbar. And for the Gemara, it's possible. The Bnei Marav, the Maskil the Raisa B'Tloshin. There are people in Eretz Yisrael. The custom was that they didn't have like Simchas Torah every year. They finished the Torah. They divided each parsha into a third. And once in every 3 years, they finish the Torah. So it's possible to have Rosh Chodesh Adar around in Sefer Bamidbar. So it's possible to have Sefer Bamidbar, Parshas Balak, to be in Rosh Chodesh Adar. And therefore, because they're finishing the Torah once in every 3 years. So therefore, that's what the Bryce is saying, that sometimes you can be reading the Parshas Shkolim in 1 week, and the next week you're going to read it as part of the Seder Parshas. Tanya Kavasi de Shmuel. We have a proof according to Shmuel, a brisa that says beferish, and that's what we do. Rosh Chodesh Adar shecholias b'Shabbos. Rosh Chodesh Adar falls out on Shabbos. Korim Kisisa. You read Parsha Kisisa for the Shkolim. Umaftirim b'Yehoyada HaKohen, and you maftir Yehoyada HaKohen. So this ends the machlokes Rav and Shmuel, and we paskin like Shmuel that you read Parshas Kisisa for Shkolim. Amar Nugamara. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak Napocha. Rosh Chodesh Adar shecholias b'Shabbos. Rosh Chodesh Adar falls out on Shabbos. So what do we do? So you have Rosh Chodesh, you have the Parshas HaShavua, and you also have Parshas Shkolim. So Mitzian, like we do today, Sholosh Torahs, you should read 3 Torahs. Pull out 3 Torahs from the Aron, the Karim Behem, and you read from them. Echad bin Yonah Shel Yom, one this Parshas HaShavua, Echad b'Shel Rosh Chodesh, Echad b'Kisisa. Well, technically, like we've seen before, you probably could just pull out one Sefer Torah and just keep rolling. But the reason why you pull out 3 Sefer Torahs is because you don't want the tzibur to wait. So it's faster if you just do Hagbar and Galila and then have a Sefer Torah, which is on its place, and not to waste the time of the tzibur as you're rolling from place to place. That's why we take out 3 Sefer Torahs. Rosh Chodesh Teves, which is Chanukah time, that falls out on Shabbos, you bring 3 Sefer Torahs. One that talks about the Parshas Shavua, which is usually Parshas Miketz, and one is Rosh Chodesh, and one is this Parshas Nesiim of Chanukah. Utzricha. Why did Rabbi Yitzchak Napcha have to say twice that certain Shabbosim you're going to take out 3 Sefer Torahs? Once you tell me one, I could figure out the other. So the Gemara says, if it would just say the first case of the second case of Rosh Chodesh Teves Shechol Yes b'Shabbos, I would say B'Holkom Rav Yitzchak. In Rosh Chodesh Teves, you take out 3 Sefer Torahs. Ava Bahach, but the other one, Karav Svirle, he holds like Rav, and therefore you take out 2 Sefer Torahs. Rosh Chodesh Adar that falls out on Shabbos, since according to Rav, you're reading anyway the Rosh Chodesh, so you only have to take out 2 Sefer Torahs. The Amma Pasha Shkolim Kabin Lichi B'Shtei Torah Sagi Kamash Malam that Rabbi Yitzchak Napcha held like Shmuel that Pasha Shkolim you're reading Pashas Kisisa, and therefore even on Rosh Chodesh Adar that falls out on Shabbos you take out 3 Sefer Torahs. And asks the Gemara let him just say the first memra Rabbi Chodesh Adar Shkol Yis B'Shabbos that you fall out you take 3 Sefer Torahs, and of course I will, and then obviously he paskin like Shmuel, and I would figure out that when Rosh Chodesh Teves falls out on Shabbos you also take out 3 Sefer Torahs, one for the Parshavua, one for Rosh Chodesh, one for Chanukah. And for the Gemara, yes, the truth is, Rabbi Yitzchak Napcha never said the second statement. It's the students who's logically inferred that if Rabbi Yitzchak Napcha said the first statement, when Rosh Chodesh Adar falls out on Shabbos, he must have held also the second statement of Rosh Chodesh Teves Shechol Shabbos that he would also take out 3 Sefer Torahs. New Gemara, Itma, we learned in a Brisa. Now you have another problem. All this blot that we're learning is about problems in laning. So now you have Rosh Chodesh Teves that falls out on a weekday. Well, you have to lane 2 things: one Chanukah and one Rosh Chodesh. So what do? Rabbi Yitzchak said, "Kari tlasab Rosh Chodesh." You take 3. This is what we do. You take 3 aliyahs and you pull out 2 sefer Torahs if you possible, and the first one you read 3 of the Rosh Chodesh, v'chad b'Chanukah, and 1 is read Chanukah. Rosh Chodesh is the most important. Rav Dimi de Min Chayfa Omar, he said, Rav Dimi says, "Kari tlasa b'Chanukah." You actually try to get 3 aliyahs in the Chanukah laning. In the second Sefer Torah, you read one person reads the Rosh Chodesh laning. Amar Ramani, Ramani said, "Kavasi the Rabbi Yitzchak Napcha Mistavra." I would think that Rabbi Yitzchak Napcha is more logically correct. That you make more people get the Rosh Chodesh. You call 3 people for the Rosh Chodesh and 1 for Chanukah. Why 3 people? The Tada v'she'ena Tada. You have something that comes more often than something that does not come more often. Rosh Chodesh comes more than Chanukah. Tada Kodim. The one that comes more often comes first, and therefore it's more important. The Rosh Chodesh laning is more important than the Chanukah laning. Therefore, 3 people will be called up for Rosh Chodesh and 1 for Chanukah. So Rabbi Yitzchak Napcha is the more logical one. Rav Avin, just the opposite. Kavasi Rav Dimi Mistabra. Rav Dimi seems to me correct. That you should read 3 for Chanukah and 1 for Rosh Chodesh, because what makes you have Migaram LaRevi Yaveh? What makes you have a 4th aliyah? Normally, you only have 3 aliyahs in a short laning. Why do you have a 4th one today? Rosh Chodesh. Therefore, Hilkach Revi, the 4th aliyah, should be Rosh Chodesh by Mikra, should be the Rosh Chodesh. So therefore, I should read 3 from Chanukah, and 1, the last one, should be the Rosh Chodesh. So my Havala, what is the halacha? Rav Yosef Amar Ein Mashgichim Rosh Chodesh. Rav Yosef says you don't pay attention to Rosh Chodesh. The more important one is Chanukah, like Rav Dimi said. And Rav Amar Ein Mashgichim Chanukah. You don't listen to Chanukah. The more important one is Rosh Chodesh, and you call 3 Rosh Chodesh and 1 Chanukah, like Rabbi Yitzchak Napcha. The Hilkach said the halacha is Ein Mashgichim Chanukah Rosh Chodesh Ikar. The main one is Rosh Chodesh. So therefore, the halacha is when Rosh Chodesh Teves falls out during the weekdays, you call 3 people up for Rosh Chodesh and 1 for Chanukah. No Gemara. Itma we learned. If Rosh Chodesh if it comes out to be in Ata Tetzava. Oh, so here, Shkolim, Parsha Shkolim comes out in Ata Tetzava. It can happen. So what do? Amar Rabbi Yitzchak Napcha, again, they didn't have the mafter business, so they had to have 7. One of the 7 was a Parsha Shkolim reading. So Rabbi Yitzchak Napcha says, Kari Shita B'Ata Tzava. You call 6 people up for Ata Tetzava, Ad Kisisa, and then you read Kisisa, and the 7th aliyah is Mikisisa Ba'ada Sisa, the regular Shkolim reading from Kisisa to the Parsha of Ki and Nechoishes, V'chan and Nechoishes. So the Parsha is broken down into 6 people, as it normally is. Normally it's broken down into 7. You break it down into 6, and the Parsha Shkolim will be number 7. Amar Abayis, so Abayis says, I don't like that idea. Amre, we go to the top of Lamed Amar Aleph. Amre, people will say, Oik mehu de kamaik mahasam. You see that it so happens that you didn't finish Parshas Tetzava and you went into Parshas Kisisa. In other words, people didn't have a chumash in front of them, so they'll think that this was all related to Parshas Tetzava. They won't know that Parshas Kisisa is another parsha that you're reading it for Shkolim. They'll think it's all part of Parshas Tetzava, because people were just listening by heart. Maybe they didn't have a chumash in front of them. Elam Abaya, you have to make it so that people realize that you're making an extra laning for the Shkolim Parsha. So Elam Abaya, this is what you do. Kari Shita B'Ata Tzava Ad Vasisa. You call 6 up to Ata Tzava and Vasisa. And then V'chad Tani V'Kari Kisisa B'Ata Sisa. And then one reads it and repeats it again. You know what? Kisisa twice. So you say Kisisa is number 7, and then you read Parsha Shkolim again as number 8. Okay, so that's what he says. Chayja, you repeated it again. In other words, I'm sorry, you read 6 from Ata Tetzava and into Parshas Kisisa, and then repeating Parshas Kisisa as number 7. And therefore, you read Kisisa twice. So people will ask, why are you reading Kisisa twice? It must be, it's Parsha Shkolim. That's Abaya's idea. Meisavei, the Gemara asks the question. Choli is Parsha Smuchula Bein Melfanea Bein Melachrea Koyin Oisa V'Koisel Oisa. You read it and you double it, right? So how do you read this brisa? If Parshas Shkolim comes out, let's say in Parshas Tetzava, you read it and double it. So that sounds like Abaya's idea. Bishlam Abaya Nicha. It makes perfect sense how you read this brisa. It comes out in Parshas Tetzava. You read 6 from Parshas Tetzava and Kisisa, and you repeat Parshas Kisisa twice. El Rabbi Yitzchak Napcha Kasha. Rabbi Yitzchak Napcha's idea. What does it mean doubling it? I mean, when are you doubling it? You're only reading Parshas Kisisa once. That's what Rabbi Yitzchak Napcha said. According to Rabbi, does everything make perfect sense? This brisa makes sense if you learn that lefanel means Parshat Tetzava, and then you're reading it twice. But it's Parshas Vayakel. How are you reading Parshas Kisisa twice? What's the meaning of this brisa? Koiflim b'shabbosos. Hochenami koiflim b'shabbosos. Milachrea means that means you're reading it twice in different weeks. That's not that you're reading it twice right now. You're reading it twice in this different weeks. That's what the brisa means. In Parshas Vayakel, you read Kisisa the previous week, and you're going to repeat Parshas Kisisa again when it's Parshas Vayakel for Parshas Shkolim. But that's what it means, but it's not that you're reading Parshas Kisisa twice. So Huadinama, you can learn Pshat that when it comes out Parshas Tetzava, you're not reading Kisisa twice. You're reading 6 from Parshas Tetzava, and the 7th one is Parshas Kisisa, but you're doubling it because you're going to read next Shabbos also Parshas Kisisa. Gemara says, Chol liyes b'Kisisa atzma. New Gemara. What happens if Parshas Shkolim falls out in Parshas Kisisa? I'm not sure if that could happen, but let's say it did. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak Napcha, Korishita min Vadasisa. He says a funny pshita. You don't read Parshas Kisisa in the beginning. You start from the middle of the Parsha, ad Vayakel. You read from Asisa till Vayakel, and then you go back and do the Kisisa part. Bechad Kari Kisisa ad Vasisa. And then the 7th Aliyah gets the Shkolim, which is the beginning of the Parsha. So Maskif La Abaya says, people who are going to see that being done in shul are not going to realize that you're reading it from Parsha Shkolim. They're going to say, oh, we left it out. Let's reread it. But they're not going to know that you're making a special reading for Parsha Shkolim. So the Gemara says, Elam Abaya's idea is like this: Kari Shita ad Vayakel b'chad Tani v'Kari v'Sisa Kisisa v'ad v'Sisa. In other words, you call 6 up by Vayakel, and then one reads this. The 7th one will repeat, go back to Kisisa and read v'ad v'Sisa. That's 6. So the 7th one will repeat Kisisa. Tanya Kavasu Devaya Cholias b'Kisisa Atzma. You read the whole parsha in 6 people. The Kaifel and you repeat it as the Parsha Shkolim. The 7th person repeats that piece of Parsha Shkolim. New Gemara, Chalias B'Soich Shabbos Magdimin Shabbos Avra. The Mishnah said that if Parsha Shkolim comes out in the middle of the week, then you read Parsha Shkolim before. Okay, so let's say Rosh Chodesh Adar comes out on a Tuesday. The Parsha Shkolim is the Shabbos before Rosh Chodesh. Itma, we learned Rosh Chodesh Adar Shecholias Ber Shabbos. Let's say Rosh Chodesh Adar falls out on a Friday. Rav Amma Makdimim. Rav Amma says even if it falls on Friday, you read it the previous week before, about 7 days earlier, 6 days earlier, in already the 4th week of Teves of Shavat. Ushmul Amma Ma'achron. If it's already Rosh Chodesh Adar on a Friday, push Parsha Shkolim to Beis Adar. That's what he's saying. So Rav Makdim, you put it first. Dimkain Batzru Luhu Yom Shulchanos. Remember, the reason why we're trying to read it from Rosh Chodesh Adar or earlier, just so that we can give 15 days. We should read it 15 days in advance when the bankers start preparing themselves. Before setting up shop. So usually they set up shop on the 15th day of Adar. So we want to read the Parsha Shkolim 2 weeks before to remind people that the bankers are here. You better go to the bankers to drop off your half a shekel. So therefore we want to give 2 weeks notice to the people. Ushmul Hamama Achron. Shmuel says, nevertheless, you can read it on Beis Adar. Why? Amalach soif chamesa b'malei shapsa mikle. The 15th day will come out on Friday, right? He holds that since the 15th, if Rosh Chodesh Adar falls out on Shabbos, then the 15th day of Adar will come out on Friday, and so even the bankers will not set up shop for the first time on Friday. They'll push it off to Sunday. Therefore, you could delay the reading of Parsha Shkolim to Beis Adar, which will be Shabbos, which still will give you enough time of 14 days till 2 weeks from that Sunday, where the bankers are all set up, where you can start making your deposit for the half a shekel. Tanan, we learned in the Mishnah, Cholias b'soisha Shabbos. If it falls out on Shabbos, Makdimin l'sha'ava. If it falls out during the week, Shkolim, Parsha Shkolim, Rosh Chodesh falls out during the week. The Mishnah says you go at it earlier. Umafsiki l'Shabbos acheres, and you interrupt for the Shabbos acheres. My love afilu be'erev Shabbos, even if it falls out on Shabbos, and erev Shabbos you go early, like Rav said it. So the Gemara says, "Loi b'sayich Shabbos dafka." Only if it falls out in Shabbos you go early, but if it falls out on erev Shabbos, you actually push it off, like Shmuel. Toshma, Ezihi Shabbos Rishonim. What is the first Shabbos? Kol Shechol Rosh Chodesh Adar Lias B'Soicha V'Afilu Be'erev Shabbos. So that's called the first Shabbos. That means even if Rosh Chodesh Adar falls on a Friday, you read it the Shabbos prior. So that's called the first Shabbos. That's the Shabbos Shkolim. So we see clearly, like Rav said, that when Rosh Chodesh Adar falls out on a Friday, you read Parsha Shkolim earlier. My love, afilu be'erev Shabbos dumi d'soicha. Just like when Rosh Chodesh falls out during the week, that's the same halacha if it falls on a Friday. Ma toicha, if it falls out during the week, makdimin, you go early. Av erev Shabbos, if it falls on a Friday, makdimin, you go earlier. Shmuel ba. No, but the Brisa means if it falls out on Shabbos, if you go early, if it falls out on Shabbos, you read it on Shabbos. That's mean. What's the first Shabbos? Kol Chodesh, Chol Rosh Chodesh Adar Lias Ba on Shabbos. That's the first Parsha Shkolim. And even if Rosh Chodesh Adar falls out on Friday, you would read it on the Shabbos itself. Exactly what Shmuel holds. Shmuel Ba. That's how you read the Brisa. And then the Gemara says Kitanoi. Actually, this machlokes of Rav and Shmuel. If Rosh Chodesh Adar falls out on Friday, Do you read the Parsha Shkolim the week before or the Shabbos after? Is a machlokes tanoim. Misargin l'Shabbos is divrei Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. You skip a Shabbos according to Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. Blazer ben Shimon Blazer Ame ein misargin. You don't skip. Amar Rabbi Shimon Blazer ein misargin. Ame ein misargin. When do I say you don't skip? Bisman shechol liyos be'er Shabbos. I hold when Rosh Chodesh Adar falls out on Er Shabbos. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, this Tana holds that you will read it. The Shabbos Shkolim will be read on Shabbos, the day Beis Adar. You read Shabbos Shkolim. So therefore, you don't have a skipping because the following week is the week before. The week before Purim, which will probably come out on a Friday. If Rosh Chodesh Adar falls out in a weekday, I agree with Bakdim, you read it. The Karim Shabbos Abra, Alpha Pishu Shvat, you read from the Shabbos earlier, before Rosh Chodesh Adar, even though it's Shvat, and then you'll skip a week. So basically, what the Gemara just found, a machlokes tanoim of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi and Shimon Elazar, is exactly the same machlokes of Rav and Shmuel. The new Gemara, B'shnia Zachar, we read Parsha Zachar, the second Shabbos. Itma we learn Purim Shecholi Esber Shabbos, Purim that falls on a Friday. Rav Amma Makdimin, you read Parsha Zachar the Shabbos before. That's what we do. Makdimin Parsha Zachar. Ushmuel Amma, Shmuel says if Purim is on a Friday, Ma'achrin, you read Parsha Zachar later. Not like what we do. The after Purim Shabbos, the next day you read Parsha Zachar. Rav Amma Makdimin Kechet Loy Tiktam Asiyel Zchira. Rav says you always have Zchira Amalek before celebrating of Purim. Ushmul Amma Ma'achrin, you always push it later. Amalach Kiva the Ikam Mukaf and the Avdim Kamesa. Since the 15th will come out on Shabbos, if the 14th is on Friday, the 15th is on Shabbos. So then Asiyah Zchira about the Asan. It's Parsha Zachar and Purim are falling out at the same time. So therefore, Shmuel says you read Parsha Zachar later. Tanan, we learned in the Mishnah, Bashniya Zachar. On the second week, you reach Parsha Zachar. But if you read the Mishnah is talking about on the first case that Rosh Chodesh Adar came out on Shabbos. The Mishnah is talking about when Rosh Chodesh came out on Shabbos. Mikla Purim be'er Shabbos. Purim comes out on a Friday. Ukutani, and the Mishnah says Bashniya Zachar. You read Parsha Zachar. So this is a kasha on Rav. It's not the second. It's not going on when Rosh Chodesh falls out on Shabbos. When Rosh Chodesh falls out during the weekday, and therefore you read Parsha Shkolim early and you skip the second one. That following Shabbos is Parsha Zachar. So Mishnah is not talking about a case where Purim comes out on Erev Shabbos. Tashma, come in here. Ezer Shabbos Shnia Kol Shechol Purim Lias B'Soichav Afil Ber Shabbos. My love, Purim falls out. You read Parsha Zachar, even if Purim falls out on Friday. My love, Erev Shabbos Dumi de Toicha. Erev Shabbos is like when Purim falls out during the weekday. Ma Toicha, when Purim falls out on the weekday, Makdimin, you read Parsha Zachar earlier. Af Erev Shabbos Makdimin, maybe when it falls on a Friday, you read it earlier. Shmuel Ba, V'chein Tonan Be'er Shmuel Ba. That means that it's talking about when Purim comes out on Shabbos, then you would read Parsha Zachar that day, and Huadin, the Bryce is saying that if Purim falls out on Friday, you would read Parsha Zachar on Shabbos, like Shmuel. So that Shmuel has an interpretation of Bryce that makes the Bryce concur with his opinion. Let's say Purim falls out not on a Friday, but actually on Shabbos itself. Everybody holds you don't make it early. You actually read Purim. You actually read Parsha Zachar that Shabbos. Obviously, by the way, it can't happen that Purim comes out on Shabbos. But if it did, Rav Huna says that Rav and Shmuel both read Parsha Zachar will be that day. Rav Nachman Amar Adayin Hi Machloikis. It's still a Machloikis. And Idmar Almi Amar Chi Barapa Amar Ababa Amar Rav said Purim Shechol Lias B'Shabbos. If Purim falls out on Shabbos, you don't read Parsha Zachar that week on Purim, but Makdim, you go to the week before V'Kari Parsha Avra Zachar, the previous Parsha Zachar. In all these cases, we paskin like Rav, that you actually read the Parshas right before Purim. You never read Parsha Zachar after Purim. Beshlisis, on the third Parsha, you read Parshas Paraduma, Tanra Bottom, Ezi Shlabeshlisis. What is the third Parsha? By the way, reading Parshas Paraduma is most likely a Drabanan. And you read Parshas Paraduma to remind yourself to become purified prior to Pesach. So what is called the third week? Kol Shesmucha LePurim. Anything that's the Shabbos right after Purim, we read Parshas Para. Machre. Itma, It's not the Shabbos after Purim, but it's the Shabbos before Rosh Chodesh Nisan. So is it an argument? There's no argument. If Rosh Chodesh Nisan falls out on Shabbos, then you're going to read Parshas Para the week before. Shabbos. If that means that there will be if Parshas Para falls out, if Parshas Para falls out in the middle of the week, then you're going to read it. You're going to read it that Shabbos as well. Okay, so that is that. So therefore, it's not a real machlokes. It just depends when Rosh Chodesh Nisan falls out. Okay, if Rosh Chodesh Nisan falls out on Shabbos, you didn't have to put Parshas Chodesh before, so therefore, then you read on that previous parsha, Parshas Paraduma, like Rab Chanina says, not close to Purim. But when Rosh Chodesh Nisan falls out in the middle of the week, then you're going to have to read Parshas Chodesh right before before Rosh Chodesh Nisan. So therefore, then you're going to have to be makdim Parshas Para to the previous week before that, which is the parsha right after Purim. Tana Rabbanim, rabbis taught Rosh Chodesh Adar Shecholias b'Shabbos, and Rosh Chodesh Adar falls out on Shabbos. Karin Kisisa Maftirim b'Yehada. Rosh Chodesh Adar is Kisisa, and you read the Haftarah of Yahayada. Be'ezu Shabbos Rishayna Kol Shechol Rosh Chodesh Adar Shiyuv Seicha V'Afilu Be'er Shabbos. B'Shniya, second Shabbos, you read Zachar Maftirim Pakadpi, which is the story of Shmuel and Shaul HaMelech killing out Amalek. The Ezi Shabbos Nia Kol Shechol Yis Purim B'Seicha V'Afilu Be'er Shabbos. Bashlish is the third parsha, Paraduma. What do you do for the Haftarah? Maftirim Zrakti Aleichem, which is talk about God's going to purify us when Mashiach comes. The Ezi Shabbos Shlishis Kol Shismucha Purim Achrel. The Shabbos after Purim is Parshas Para. Beravias you read HaChodesh Zeh. Umaftirin Kaim Hashem Elokim Rishon Bechal HaChodesh, where God is going to renew the base, the building of the third base of Mikdash. Again, this brisa just discussed what are the haftorahs of the four different parshias. Now we go to Amud Beis. The Ezi Shabbos Revius, what is called the fourth Parshas HaChodesh, Kol Shechol Rosh Chodesh Nisan Lias B'Seicha. If Rosh Chodesh isn't that week, the Shabbos before that is Parshas HaChodesh, and then the Shabbos before that is Parshas Para, the Shabbos before that is Parshas Zachar. Most likely you had a break in between, and the Shabbos before that was Parshas Kolim, Afilu Be'er Shabbos. B'chamishes Choyzern L'Sidron. Imagine this. On the first Shabbos, you go back to the normal reading, okay? Imagine this. Let's say Mai. What does the Mishnah mean? You go back to the normal reading. So Rab Ami said, unbelievable, that during these four parshas, you don't read Parshas Shavua. So let's say it comes out in Truma, Tetzava, Kisisa, Vayaka, Pekude. You don't read those parshas. You read only the parshas of Para, Zachar, and Shkolim. That's what it means. Rabbi, so can you imagine how fast shul will be over Shabbos morning? Rabbi Yirmiyah, no. Let's say the Haftarah Sichos. The only thing that changes on these four parshias is that you read a different Haftarah, and after the 4 weeks pass, you go back to the Haftarah that talks about the Parshas HaShavua. Amar Abaye Kavosi Rab Ami Misrav. It makes sense of what Rab Ami said, that you actually skip the Parsha HaShavua. Now we learned in the Mishnah, Lakol Mafsikim. You interrupt the Parsha, the normal reading. The Mishnah said you interrupt your normal reading. Rosh Chodesh, Chanukah, Purim, Tanis, Ma'amad, Yom Kippurim. Let's say Rosh Chodesh comes out on a Monday and Thursday. You interrupt reading Parshas HaShavua and you read Parshas Rosh Chodesh. If it's a Tanis, you interrupt the Parshas Shavua and you read the Tanis. So the Mishnah is discussing that you push away reading the normal Parshas Shavua. So if we're talking about pushing away the regular Parshas, so the Mishnah is telling you that not only Shabbos you push away the Parshas Shavua, but sometimes the laning during the weekdays you push away reading the Parshas Shavua, the Ika Parsha B'chol. How can you compare the first part of the Mishnah, the second part of the Mishnah? The first part of the Mishnah discusses what the changing of the Haftarah, and the second part of the Mishnah is changing the actual reading itself, the reading during the weekday. So the Idach, the other opinion holds, Hakadisa, it doesn't matter. The Mishnah could be talking two ideas. The first idea is that when it's Parshas, the four Parshias, you read the Parsha Shavua, but the Haftarah changes. And the second part of the Mishnah is that sometimes during the week, when certain days come out, we actually push away the normal reading of the Parsha Shavua, and we read that reading of what we're supposed to read that day, which is if it's Rosh Chodesh, Rosh Chodesh, if it's Tanis, it's Tanis. One last piece of Gemara, and that will wrap it up. Over tiniest lama li hafsaka. The Gemara asks a question on a tiniest question on a regular tiniest. What do you read when you go to shul in the Shachris? You read Vaychal. So why do you have to stop at all? Why do we have to stop? You're going to read by Mincha. So let's read in the morning the regular Parsha Shavua, and in the afternoon we'll read Vayachal. Lama li hafsaka likri mitzafra binyanu diyayme. Let's read in the morning, Shachris, you read the regular Seder Hayom, this Parsha Shavua, or B'mincha reading, because of Mincha we take out the Sefer Torah on a Tainus, but Tanisa will read what they read on a Tainus. Messiah Rav Huna, this is a proof to Rav Huna, the Amar Rav Huna. Rav Huna is going to say that in ancient times, no one went to they didn't go to shul, they didn't read the Sefer Torah at all during Shachris on a fast day. What did they do? In the morning of a fast day, everybody came to shul, but they just had a whole meeting of all the people living in the town and discussing why is HaKadosh Baruch Hu punishing us? Let's try to make changes, and people would throw up suggestions on how we can do tshuva. So there was no laning at all. So the only laning that you normally did on a tainus was in the afternoon. And in the afternoon, since there's only one laning, you don't read Parshas Shavua, you read Parshas Vaychal. So Heicha Avdinan, the Gemara, we had this Gemara in Tainus, early part of Tainus. Heicha Avdinan. What do we do on a normal Tainus? Amar Abai says, Mitzafel lepalga, from the morning lepalga till noontime, minyanim b'mila demasa. People examine the ways of the city. You see what's wrong. What can we do? What can we change? Mipalgo diyayim lepanya, riva diyayim kori umaftir. From the second afternoon, from noontime till 3 o'clock, you read the Torah and you make a maftir. You have a mincha. The last quarter of the day, they just say Tehillim. Shnema, Pasuk says, Vayikru b'sefer Torah Hashem Elokechem. Reviyas Hayom, they read the Torah a quarter of the day. Or Reviyas Hayom misvadim mishtachim. The rest of the day, they prayed and confessed and davened and prostrated themselves. So we see that the second part of the day is broken up into two parts. One is reading the Torah, and one is just plain praying. So, but in the morning, they gathered and discussed the city problems. So the Gemara says, let's do it the opposite way. Let's read the Torah in the morning and then daven till noon. And then in the afternoon, discuss how we can do tshuva. So the Gemara says, I shouldn't think, that thought should not enter my mind. The Ksiv, it says by Ezra, when he was trying to get the people to fast and do tshuva, he said, al mal hagoyla. Everybody who was frightened to hear the words of God, those that came during the exile to back to Eretz Yisrael. And I was silent and we were quiet until noontime. And in the afternoon time, Minchas Erev kamti mitanisi, I got up from my fast and started praying. So we see that the afternoon is reserved for laning and prayer, and in the morning is a time just to listen in to how we can do tshuva, and that's how they set up the prayer. So again, this is an important daf and a halachic daf and how we set up our lanings on these 4 parshias. Okay, hard daf.